Hi everyone, I've been working in human resources for almost 13 years now, and I get lots of questions from people about what it's like to work in HR. And so I wanted to put together a series of videos covering the different parts of HR. I'll be drawing on my experience, discussions that I've had with colleagues, and different articles that I've read, as well as my studies. I'm really hoping that this video and series will be helpful for HR students, someone thinking about studying HR graduates, or employees who are thinking about moving into HR. So in this first video, I'll be covering common myths associated with HR as a career. There are timestamps in the description if you'd like to jump ahead. So I'm going to start off with one of the most common misconceptions about HR, and that is that HR is a career for nice people. Often people will say to me, I'm a real people person, I love working with people, and so I'd love to work in HR. And I don't want to come across as overly negative, but I really want to be honest and paint a realistic picture of what a career in HR involves. I recently read a great article on LinkedIn by Brian Walker, who is a Senior Vice President of HR. I'll include a link to his article in the description. And he wrote that a career in HR is not about being nice, it's about being fair. And I think that is something that people need to understand when they're considering a career in HR. An example of some of the not nice work that HR performs is restructuring an organization. HR is often heavily involved in a restructure. I've done countless restructures and reorganizations throughout my career. For those of you who aren't aware, a restructure or a reorganization in an HR context is where an organization changes how they do things and how they structure their teams and departments and employees. And this may mean moving from a more centralized structure to a decentralized structure, or changing to a business structure, or changing how they operate. For example, they may look at outsourcing a part of their business. As a result of a restructure, it may mean that there are less jobs for people, which results in layoffs, or people may have to do a job that they originally didn't sign up to do. And this is where working in HR can be difficult. It can be hard, emotionally. And you need to ensure that you treat people fairly and equitably. But in a lot of cases, regardless of how well you do your job, someone will be upset. And Brian provides an example of someone who started their career as an aeronautics engineer, then moved to a role in finance, and now they work in HR. And the employee said, I was surprised about how difficult HR is. Designing airplanes that won't fall out of the sky is a lot easier than managing HR. And I've never designed airplanes myself, but based on my experience, I agree with what he's saying. Working in HR, it can be really hard, but it is also really rewarding. The second myth that I wanted to discuss is that HR makes all of the decisions regarding employees. And this really varies depending on the HR function and also the particular type of work that you are doing. But in a lot of cases, HR acts as an advisor to a business leader and helps them to achieve an outcome in a fair, equitable, and legal way. In the previous myth, I discussed restructures and how HR is heavily involved in the process. However, a lot of the time, the restructure is really driven by the business. For example, a CEO or a vice president may determine that in order to increase profits or expand into a new market segment, they need to change how they run their organization. And this will then lead to HR getting involved and working with the relevant leaders to help implement the restructure. Later, once the restructure is implemented, employees who are upset, they can sometimes point the finger at HR. And I've had this discussion with many HR colleagues about how HR is often blamed when those same employees don't realize that behind the scenes, the HR person has been working really hard to ensure that the process was handled fairly. And sometimes some leaders, not all, but some can say things like, oh, I tried to save your job, but HR made me get rid of you. When in reality, they're saying to HR, this person needs to go. And this isn't a common situation, but it's something that I've heard about from colleagues in the past. Ultimately, leaders have the biggest impact on an employee's experience, which leads me to the next myth. So I was having a discussion with a friend about work, and he was describing some issues with his company's culture, things that he wasn't happy with. And he said to me, what do you think HR should do about it? And it made me think people have a bit of a misconception about HR's role when it comes to culture and engagement. Whilst it is true that HR plays a huge role in shaping an organization's culture, ultimately what an employee experiences on a day-to-day basis, it comes down to their leader and their team. And HR can make a big difference in terms of culture by conducting research on what the current culture is and what the desired culture is in the future, and helping leaders to close that gap and drive change. Or HR may be responsible for managing the development of new values or running an employee engagement survey. But ultimately, HR acts more as a facilitator of culture or a collaborative partner as opposed to being solely responsible. The culture of an organization is really everyone's responsibility. So the final myth that I wanted to cover is that HR should be hated. Back when I was at uni, when I was doing my HR degree, or college as it's called in the States, I remember we were assigned an article to read which was called Why We Hate HR. And this was during my first year of uni, and I remember thinking, why would anyone hate HR? But we had to read the article and then write an essay debating the pros and cons of it. It's a really interesting read. It's about 15 years old now. I personally think there are some generalizations in it, but I'll leave you to make up your own mind. While some parts of the article are not what I've experienced in my career, it still does have some valid points. So I recommend that if you are studying HR or you are thinking about studying HR, you should definitely have a read through that article. So I'll include a link in the description. Whether the article is true or not, there is a tendency for HR to be hated above other functions in an organization. I remember at one stage in my career, I was leaving work for the day and I was in a lift and the lift stopped to let more people in. And the lift was pretty full and there was only room for one more person. And when the doors opened, there were two people who were wanting to get in the lift, a husband and wife. So I got out of the lift and then I made some joke about not wanting to break up a happy marriage. And I got some laughs and mainly eye rolls because it was a bit of a lame joke. And anyway, there was someone else who was waiting for the lift and she said, oh, I didn't think HR was supposed to be nice. And the way she said it, it was partly a joke, but I remember thinking it had some truth to it. And I think this comes from what I touched on earlier. As an HR professional, when you're making a decision or providing advice to a leader, in order to be fair and equitable, you have to consider multiple different factors and variables and employees. And often what you are dealing with is really confidential. So when an employee is unhappy with the decision, you can't go into detail as to the reasons for the decision because it will often involve someone else. And I think that's really one of the harder parts of HR. But over the course of my career, I've never met an HR employee who takes joy in delivering hard messages to employees or seeing employees upset. All of the HR employees that I've worked with have made sure that employees are treated fairly and with empathy. So that's been a bit of an overview of some of the most common myths associated with a career in HR. So earlier this year, I read a great book called The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier, which I covered in a separate video. And in the book, there was a section which discussed how people learn. And people only start learning. They create those new neural pathways when they have a chance to recall and reflect on what just happened. And a great way to do that is to think about what was most useful for you. So that's what I encourage you to think about now. And if you feel confident in sharing what was most useful for you, please include that in the comments because your comment might help someone else. So I like to make videos that help employees with their careers. So if you are interested in learning more things about work and how to improve your career, make sure you have a look at some of my other playlists. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Don't forget to subscribe and I will see you in the next one.